Welcome to Dr. M Health Corner Talk Show. Welcome. It's Dr. Unati here, your host. I am here today to discuss one of my favorite topics with a friend here and a colleague. I have Dr. Teresa Wood. He's a colleague here in Canada. She is a sexual medicine doctor. And of course, she does other things. She's an intimacy coach. She's a poet. She's a philosopher and a mom to twins. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here with you. Finally.
I am finally, right? Long overdue discussion. Dr. T, I want us to talk about sexual pleasure. We talk about how this sex is something that is done globally, but it's still a tabooed topic. How come? And I don't even want to start about satisfaction, you know? So let's talk about how come this well practiced act is still finding resistance to the public. We're just talking about that right now. So, how do we bring these discussions without offending people or without coming across harsh to
Right.
the world?
Right. Well, I think the first thing we need to do is remember that sexuality and sex are part of our natural biology. And I think we've lost track of that. I think we've made it such a big social taboo in our brilliant human intelligence that we've almost locked it into dark corners full of things we think we're not supposed to know. And
Right.
really, the animals have an advantage on that because of that, because they're not thinking, oh, I shouldn't have sex at this time of the month, or I shouldn't have sexual pleasure, I shouldn't think about the clitoris or something like that. There's all these
Right.
things that even when I say those words, people are just like, oh my god, she just said that. But it's amazing that we're unable to say that when all of us are having sex. I mean, most adults are having some form of sex. And what it's done is really put into a category of not being able to speak about some of the most important aspects of our sexuality, like pleasure. And now
Yes.
we've got a huge libido gap. We've got a huge orgasm gap between the genders. We have a huge pleasure gap and a satisfaction gap. And these things we created ourselves because we were so scared to talk about sex.
Talk about that, because when I look at sex and also the other aspects about it, there's a religion that plays a role. There's also cultural component to it, our backgrounds, where we grow up. A lot of times you hear, even in our practice, our clients come in telling us that I cannot be free and explore with my partner. I feel like it's dirty. You know what I mean? I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure you see this all the
Yeah.
time. So talk of that gap. How do people present when they come to talking about this gap, and how comfortable they get to even bring it to our attention? The wording, I'm quite interested in that part.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have a hard time bringing it up with their doctors. And I think a lot of doctors have a hard time responding comfortably to it because the doctors are in the same boat for the most part. I mean, I had sexual medicine program in my medical education, and it certainly didn't confer comfort to the people around me. And it wasn't about us. So, in a sense, we've had the same sexual education upbringing as the general population, unless we've done exploration on our own or read different things or worked in the field. And so, patients are cautious to bring it up, and the doctors don't really know what to do.
Right.
Commonly the complaint is, I'm having erectile dysfunction. And bam, here's a medication that stops erectile dysfunction. But erectile dysfunction is just going to promote more intercourse only sex, which we know is only pleasing 50% of the population and leaving the other 50% quite frustrated and confused and without a libido. And so
Yes.
we say things like women desire sex less or want sex less. Well, yeah, because they're not having orgasm. And our bodies are designed to orgasm just like everybody else's. But because we're not talking about outer course, we're talking about intercourse.
Intercourse.
And intercourse is outer course for men because their penises are getting stimulated, but intercourse is not outer course for women. Their sexual organ is not the vagina, it's the
Yes.
clitoris. And it is not necessarily stimulated in intercourse unless someone's stimulating it. So we
Yes.
have this very, very interesting culture built around penetrative sex that says you do this stuff for play beforehand and then you're going to get to the sex after. No, the play part was her sex, and we're going to stop it to go do this 2-minute thing that's going to end with a satisfied person and a frustrated person. And then she's
Yes.
going to be really cuddly. And we're going to say, God, why is she so cuddly? Because she's frustrated.
She's frustrated.
Yeah, she may not know she's frustrated, but biochemically, she was this close to getting the same dopamine response in her nucleus accumbens reward center of the brain that says, whoa, do that again. And because she's getting a frustration at that reward center instead of a pleasure, she's not getting the message to do that again. And she's not getting a built libido.
Yes. You know what? That's important because I come from a culture where people, even our elders, would say, I've been with my husband for 20 years, for 30 years. I have never had an orgasm.
No, I know.
And even the language that was used, men would come to the bedroom and basically mandate a woman to lay down there and they would have sex and ejaculate, and it ends there. Now you're telling us that physiologically, our brains are telling us that this is normal, it should happen that way. But then tell me, how come women, is it tabooed? Why women also expect it from outside? Because there's also that expectation of coming from outside. We expect our partners to be doing all this exploration for us to have this satisfaction. And I know that we also want to expect it from our partners too. But then how come people are not exploring it themselves and
Oh,
show their partners, probably, this is how I want to be explored?
Oh, because exploring yourself is so taboo. I mean, self love has become the most taboo topic. It's taboo for men, it's taboo for people of all genders. And making love to yourself has become this thing that if you do it, then somehow you're not going to be available for your partner to have sex on you. That's not the conversation we should be having. We should be loving ourselves first before we love anyone else, and we should be making love to ourselves before we make love to anyone else. These young women out there who are having sex for the first time, they're doing it without having made love to themselves. Like, they don't even know what feels right. Why? Because again, when we have sex education, we tell the girls about pregnancy and periods. Woohoo.
Yes.
And we tell the boys about orgasm and ejaculation. And we may say don't masturbate, or we may say do masturbate to the guys, but we don't even mention it to the girls. At least when I grew up, it was not mentioned. The clitoris was not mentioned. The vulva was not mentioned. It was all about receiving a penis on the inside, and that was going to cause you a lot of problems. That's
Yes.
kind of how it
Yes.
was. But you're
Yes.
going to put up with it because it feels good. Well, yeah, penetration does feel good for people of all genders. There's no question. The anus and the vagina are full of nerve endings that
All the nerve endings.
they they love that feeling, and the feeling when in a consensual situation, the feeling of being penetrated is a beautiful feeling. The feeling of orgasm is an incredible feeling, and it should be associated at the end or near the end of most of these experiences for people of all genders. But we've really grown to believe that many women can't. In my opinion, most of the women who can't, once they speak to someone like me, they can. So, what's the problem? The problem is lack of education. And you say exploration, but how do they even explore what they have no idea what to do? They don't
To
know what
do.
to do, and we
Yeah.
don't talk about it. Well, here's a
Yes.
clitoris. Here's how you rub it. Here's how it might feel good. Here's a vibrator. Here's the banister you probably would have been lucky to slide down when you were a little girl if you would have known that actually you had your
Yes.
sexual organ there, because nobody told you that, right?
Right.
So
Right.
I think if we just had an education where we said, it's really normal to explore yourself sexually. It's really normal to, and here are your body parts, and here's how they work. So it's the clitoris and the penis that are analogous for sexual pleasure. They're the ones that will lead, when stimulated, to results at your reward center in your brain that will tell you to do something again if it's consensual and feels good and gets you off. And
Right.
here's how you touch it, and here's how you teach someone to touch it. And I think conveniently for the male population, intercourse just worked. So
Yes,
all
it
of our
did.
sex education based on intercourse resulted in exactly what men needed to give them their libido, to give them their satisfaction. But all the things that were needed for women to have satisfaction and a rising libido, and a responsive, and a sexuality that isn't just responsive but comes from their own desire, from their own reward center, telling them to do that again, was all annihilated by silence. It was never talked about. And silence is almost louder than words. Like if you say, don't touch your clitoris, people will. But if you say, pregnancy, period, okay, next subject, and you don't mention clitoris, that is a very strong statement. And it is so strong that our entire North American population, most of the European population, most of the world don't even use the word comfortably. And it's still banned. I still get blocked for it on Instagram.
I know you were just saying that. And also now this brings a lot of resentment in relationships because, like you said, the other one is satisfied and then the other person is left frustrated. And here's the thing though about all of this. How come sometimes women get the pushback from their partners? I'll say in the case of a heterosexual relationship, women sometimes when they talk about these issues, it feels like their partner perceives them as probably a slut, or when they're asking for what they deserve, it's perceived differently even by the opposite sex. Do you
Oh,
find that?
well, this is all the education. I mean, the media, the education, the things that we see online. I mean, we see a man and a woman. Show me a movie where somebody's hand is anywhere near a clitoris during these 5-minute thrust scenes where the female is miraculously, you know, like acting ecstatic because she's on top or underneath, and there's like 5 or 6 thrusts of clearly intercourse. Both of their hands are not under those blankets. Nobody's showing clitoral involvement, but she's having an orgasm. And over, that is the messaging we are giving the world, that it is simple and easy with thrusting of intercourse for a woman to be like, ah, and it's just not true. And
That's not true.
so we've built this false expectation of women, and the poor men think that if their women aren't having these miraculous orgasms from intercourse, something's wrong with them. Well, it's not that something's wrong with them, it's that the clitoris has not been touched. It's plain and simple. That the penis is getting touched, the female pleasure organ is not being involved. And so she's not going to have this miracle that the actresses show so well, because the directors are directing so well that it's just incredible to have something inside you going in and out. It's just not that incredible. It feels good. I'm not going
Right.
to lie. It's just not going to take you to the next level. Now, there are nerves of the clitoris, because the clitoris is quite large compared to what we thought it was, a little button on the outside. um, there are some, there is some stimulation from intercourse, and people will argue up and down that you can get vaginal orgasms, etc. Um, the thing is, none of that matters to me. What matters to me is why aren't we just teaching
Yes.
girls and women and men and people of all genders that the pleasure organs are these two organs, or there's multiple, because genders don't differentiate exactly into two genders like we used to think. Scientifically, there are probably about 50 genders, many of which we didn't understand. And really, again, it's our human nature to want to box things in and say these are right and
Conditioning.
everything else is wrong. But nature has designed a multiplicity of genders, and let me just say that it hasn't designed, what isn't designed in nature, is for only some of them to have sexual pleasure. The sexual pleasure nerves exist in all humans for the most part, unless there's a cancer in the way or something like that. So,
Right.
or a spinal cord injury. But there is a link from the outer organs of people of all genders to the reward center of the brain, We're rewarded for drinking water for sustenance, eating food for sustenance, emptying our bowels, emptying our bladders, and orgasm. It's incredible.
Yes.
And those
Yes.
are the things that are going to keep the species alive. So we've developed a culture, multiple cultures, where women aren't allowed the part of sexual function that's telling them to like it. And then we wonder what's wrong in our relationships. So, what I
Yes.
see for the most part is people who say, I don't know why she doesn't want to do it anymore. Or the woman who's like, I don't know, I just don't feel like doing it. Like he's really into it and I'm really into him, but I don't really want to have sex as much as he does. And I look at them and I think, well, when is the last time she had sex? And they say, well,
Mhm.
we tried 2 weeks ago. I'm like, no, no, no. When was the last time she came
She
during sex?
can. Yes.
When did she last have sexual pleasure that would tell her brain that she actually wants this stuff? And
Right.
and this is why I say to men, like men are really interested in my talks usually because this isn't their fault. And I think in our society, when we try to say, the patriarchy or blah blah blah, like people get like the ego is offended, right?
Hmm.
This isn't a blame game. The fault, if anything, is in the way we developed our sex education programs. Out of fear of saying too much, we said too little. All we have to do is say more. And when the men are at my program, their hands are up. They're like, well, what about this? How do I do this? And like, I just tell them. And they
Right.
leave.
Yes.
They're
It's
like,
important. Yes. Right.
they just say, where were you when I was 18? And then I'll never forget the 83-year-old lady who contacted me after a talk and said, I don't know if you know what you're up to, young lady, but you're just changing the world. She said, I just had my first orgasm. I'm 83 years old. And I
Wow.
just did what you said. And then she said, my husband would have loved to see this. We had no idea. And
And he was gone.
obviously he was passed away.
She's 83.
Yeah.
Yes. You know what, Dr. Teresa, it's quite an interesting thing because it brings a lot of pain to couples. I mean, we see this, and a lot of times the main or maybe one of the top causes of divorce in cases of marriage, sex comes first. Sex is one of the top reasons, other than the other issues. And yet, it's still a difficult phenomenon to be explored and also just do the thing, like in terms of the physiology. Like, I mean, honestly. And also, the thing is, I think that is playing a big role is the false hope that we've been given, the porn that is out there, in terms of
Mhm.
how people they want that. Like we're just saying here, the hours and all those things that come just from watching the movie, but they're not showing people the real act of getting there,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah. Like all porn would have to do if it wanted to be like more what we say feminist, but just equalist. If they could just show how sex might look if both people were actually going to orgasm and not fake it. That'd be cool. That'd be educational, or even in the movies, like what's the problem? I know they don't want to show body parts. Show a hand going down her
Going
pants.
there,
Like, let
right?
people know that she's not like a miracle orgasm, or if I'm just thinking, or just from how into the guy she is.
Right.
We
Dr.
have to
T,
go ahead.
yes, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I,
No,
I
no,
just
no.
said
I'm just happy with discussing this in depth. Now let's talk about now a middle-aged woman, a man, because we can't run away from the fact that this satisfaction and all that, I mean, there's menopause that kicks in. And we do see women saying, Doc, I don't want him to touch me there. I'm so dry. I'm so painful. Like, do they still could still have the same pleasure even in that aspect? Because women sometimes they're even scared for any man to touch them there or any partner in terms of like if they're in the homosexual relationships. So how do we advise women who are in menopause who still want to have this pleasure?
right.
And of course, we gotta get to the men too.
Yeah, so such a good question. But first, again, I'm a strong promoter of outer course. Like, I'm going to get to obviously how to help women in menopause, but when they're talking about sex and they don't want to be touched, they're actually talking about they don't want to be the hole in which someone else is having an orgasm because the hole is hurting. Now, if
Right.
they were talking about, here's a whack load of lube that Dr. Wood recommended, and here's my clitoris, they're not complaining about as much. And likewise, when men come in that age group and want Viagra or Cialis so they can enhance their penis function, I say, is there something wrong with your fingers? Because this is what the lesbians are doing that's keeping them coming back for more and knocking each other's door down. What
Right.
is it that we think that the penis going is somehow going to please all these people whose clitoris is on the outside of that? So
Outside.
I'll often say, like, get these going, and let yourself get excited by her orgasm. And wow, you might not even need a drug to get excited. You're going to see
Lovely.
something you haven't seen in a long time. Right? But
I want to ask a question while you're still there.
okay.
Now let's talk about the squirting. Women are obsessed with squirting. And also men, they feel if they didn't get a woman to squirt, they have failed. Can you comment on that?
Oh geez, you're opening a big can of worms, and I didn't get to say anything about like hormones for menopause.
I
So
want us to get to that,
let's
Teresa,
get back to
because
that. But
okay.
you're opening basically my favorite topic, because here's an area that we don't know anything about. I mean,
Yes.
doctors argue about this incessantly. In the 90s, there was a huge debate going on. In Europe, they did all kinds of studies to show that the fluid wasn't urine. And now there's all kinds of studies showing it is urine. And some women squirt a tiny amount, and some women squirt a huge amount. I mean, soaking like 500 cc's a liter, and people say, oh well, you're peeing or you're not peeing, and I say, so we've got two problems. We've got a new expectation for women to do this, and we've got a
Yes.
whole bunch of women on the other hand who do this all the time, who have zero explanation of why it's happening. Why is
Right.
that? It's 2021, and we have a female sexual function that nobody knows what it is. I mean,
Right.
so I'm in groups of female doctors who, ask each other questions and so on. There are a ton of women who squirt on a regular basis, and they know, they're doctors, they know it's not urine. Okay. There's evidence that it isn't, but they do a study and they find urea in it and they call it urine. Or they do a study for a completely other reason of two people having sex in an MRI with the bladder filling up with fluid, and therefore squirting must be urine. No, nowhere
Right.
else in science are we allowed to therefore, on an image about what is going on, draw these incredible conclusions that have nothing to do with what we were studying. We're not allowed to do it, but we do it all the time with female sexual function because we're actually just not allowed to study it properly. So
Mm-hmm.
to me, it's the same thing when we talk about orgasm. It's like, well, Dr. Wood, you shouldn't say that everyone can orgasm because there's lots of people who can't. I'm like, well, send them to me and let me find out why. Okay.
Right.
Because I'm not going to say this isn't a new goal for women to orgasm. It is a biological function of female sexuality to orgasm. And if they can't, we should see why not. Okay.
Why
In,
not?
in terms of squirting, and I'm going to use my new invented word if you don't mind, because I
Use
don't
it.
like female ejaculation because it's just like female before male function. I don't like squirting because it's, I mean, I don't mind squirting. I love squirting. Don't get me wrong. But the word isn't medical. We've got medical terms for everything else. I'm going to use immiculation because that means squirting in
Yes.
Latin. And Latin.
Right.
So I just googled what's squirting in Latin, and it's immiculate.
I saw that word. Yes. Yes.
I like
Yes.
it. I like it because we say we have Latin words for all the function, ejaculation, orgasm, all this. Why not use a nice word? Because we need to acknowledge at some point that just because we don't know what it is doesn't mean it isn't happening for a whole lot of ladies. So,
Right.
um, so what the people who are imiculating know is that it doesn't taste like urine, it doesn't look like urine, doesn't smell like urine, doesn't feel like urine, it doesn't feel like it's coming from the same spot as urine. is it being built up inside the bladder and held there as a reservoir? Well, very likely, because women don't have the internal sphincter between the urethra and the bladder that men do to stop retrograde ejaculation in men. We don't have that. So if we were building up a fluid in the prostate area or the prostate gland area, where else would it go but into the bladder? Would it mix with urine? Probably. Would it come out with some urea in it? Probably. Does that mean women aren't having an experience called ejaculation? Probably not. And does that mean that all women should in order to be having good sex? Probably not.
Not.
Just like I don't have two breasts the same size and nobody else in the entire population does, but we've got this expectation that we need to change our breasts if they're not identical. We've got this problem believing that all genders are supposed to be the same, that all like body parts are supposed to be the same, that all sexual experiences are supposed to be the same. It doesn't matter if you ejaculate or not, or emiculate at all. It is not, that is a distraction from the biochemical need to have a reward at your nucleus accumbens that says do that again if you want to desire it again. Okay. And the
Yes.
only thing that causes that is clitoral orgasm.
Yes.
I'll say it again,
Yes.
clitoral
Clitoral
orgasm.
orgasm. I like what you said because this was asked by a person who was quite concerned, and the pressure was coming from her partner that if really are you doing the orgasm, like really what I'm doing, but there was no mention of the hands and what people need to expect from that. I'm really pleased with that answer. So let's talk about the male aspect, uh, like the orgasm. We see this a lot. If a woman, I'll talk about a heterosexual, yeah, example, is not interested in engaging in sexual activity, and then men, they find themselves with the masturbation, they do get the experience of orgasm, but then it bring a lot of, there's a lot of resentment from the other partner. It seems like women, we also expect a lot from our partners, while men, I have patients that tell me, Doc, I've been doing it since I was 18. I'm in my 50s now, and I'm hiding it from my spouse because it brings me pleasure. And you find that when you ask the wife, she has never really done the exploration or doing herself the clitoral, or sensitizing that area. It seems like women, they've been taught this expecting from their partners.
Well, it's because women have been stripped of their own power sexually. Women have
Yes.
not been taught to touch themselves. Women have
Mm-hmm.
not been taught what parts need to be touched by their partners. And women are having sex that is not satisfying them. So they are not
Yes.
desiring it, but they desire interaction with their partner and they want the intimacy. So if they catch their partner making love to themselves, then they're worried that they're not going to have the intimacy. But that's because
Mm-hmm.
that's what they're still desiring because they're still getting rewarded for that, but they're not getting rewarded for the sexuality. So to me, it's simple. Include the clitoris in your sexual activities and don't stop till she tells you she's come. And, there's a lot of things that look like a woman's coming, but ask her. She should be unable to speak to you at the time. That's a good sign. Or she should be trying to roll over and go to sleep without cuddling with you, right?
Right,
That would
right.
be a good sign. Um,
Good.
but I think that so we've accidentally created a rift in heterosexual relationships, and the rift is that women aren't desiring what men are desiring, which is this intercourse based sex. And if we were
Yes.
having outer course based sex, like all the queer people are, then an orgasm pleasure based sex, then we would be having two people or more with the same level of desire about the
Right?
same thing, and they would be coming together for the same thing, and then both of them would be going to make love to themselves, maybe just to make sure they're still better at it than their partner is, because it's good to be independent.
Right,
um,
right.
um, but those two things work within a relationship. So whoever's taught people that if if you come on your own, you're going to have less for your partner, doesn't understand the biochemistry of the brain. Because the
Right.
biochemistry of the brain is saying the more you do it, the more you want it, right? So as soon as we teach those basic facts, we stop having fear that if women dare to touch themselves, or we dare to teach them how, that somehow they're going to be unavailable as the holes for us. Like, that is not that's not what it is.
Right. There's a lot of ego in this. There's a lot of ego. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot
Fear.
of, if you're doing it, where did you see this? You are wild. There's a lot of labeling,
Oh
like I
yeah.
said. And talk of actually the cultural component or religious component. Some
No.
people, they don't even want to be touched at that moment.
Right.
There's been so many attachments. You know what, Dr. Teresa, as we close, I would like you to share how people could actually practically. I know that a lot of times people, you mentioned vibrators and all that stuff. How come it's also a big taboo, that element in sex? I find younger women in their 20s who are choosing not to be engaging in the penetrative sex. They find that they are okay with that, and they are not interested in the penetrative sex like with a human being. And they've mentioned many times that I stimulate myself. I would love to see more of that in terms of women till getting ready, or even men getting ready, because we see a lot of people in no pleasure relationships or marriages,
Hmm.
and yet they are staying in these relationships for 10, 20, 30 years. Another friend was telling me that her aunt was telling her that I've never experienced orgasm.
Of course. I hear
Right.
it all the time. I hear it all the time. I mean,
I want us, go
we
ahead, sis.
we have we have completely stripped 50% of the population from access to sexual pleasure. And we say we've had a sexual revolution. It didn't include sex. And when we say sex, we mean intercourse. We don't even mean sex that involves female pleasure. And we talk about getting some or taking some, but we don't talk about giving some. Sex is about giving pleasure to your partner in exchange for your partner giving pleasure to you, if you want both people to have equal rise in their libidos. And if they have equal rise in their libidos, they're going to be after each other equally. And one of them won't be chasing porn to try to get off as fast as they did when they were 12, while the other one is sitting there going, why is he doing that? Well, the the thing is, they're not getting together for something that is mutually orgasmic. And if it was, which is so easy, it's just so easy. We just need to when I'm advising a couple who has this problem, my first assignment is that they don't have penetrative sex. I want them
Right.
to figure out how to get each other off without it at all.
Say that again.
Because you know,
Without
because
penetration. Yes.
and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with penetrative sex. I'm just saying it has gotten the forefront of everything, and it is not pleasing everyone. So it needs to be taken off the page for people who think that their partners are having a good time when they are having a good time, but they're not having an orgasmic time. Because again, orgasm is the only way for your nucleus accumbens, your brain's reward center, to say, do that again. And if the that is you, and you want them to do you again, then you got to give them an orgasm. And if they can't, then they need to see someone about that, and not see a
Right.
doctor that's going to say, oh, it's normal for women not to orgasm, because it is not normal for any animal on the planet
Not to orgasm.
to not
Yes.
orgasm.
I think we have normalized that, and in the fear of making people not to feel less of a person or of a satisfactory person in the relationships. And let's not even go on about people even have even faked orgasm.
Oh, yeah, well, they
Let's
have
talk
to.
about that piece. People, they fake orgasm.
They have to. They have to. There is so much pressure for women to perform. That's what the
Right.
pressure is. Then we go and blame women for performing. But intercourse has been a performance for women the entire time. Of course, it's a performance. No one's touching their clitoris. When are we going to get this? The man's sexual organ is being stimulated and the woman's is not. Of course,
No.
she's performing. And if she doesn't perform to orgasm, then she's not doing it right. Of course she's
Yes.
faking it.
And
Don't
there's a
go
loss of,
blaming women about,
yes.
let's not
And
blame
there's a
women about
fear of
faking it.
relationship loss in that aspect, because then women stay in this fake world of not being really. You know what, Dr. Teresa, as we close, I'd like you to share. People actually, they are watching us, and I want you to know this. You can reach Dr. Teresa. She's quite present on Instagram, on her Facebook, on her LinkedIn. Please check her out, and also her website. She's got loads and lots of material for you. As we close, Dr. Teresa, do you want to share with my community here the words of wisdom before we wrap up this program?
Words of wisdom before we wrap up. Um, Go give your partner some pleasure. Go give yourself some pleasure. I won't say go F yourself because I'm not allowed to. But I mean, that's the thing. Those are the things that are going to help you find out about yourself. And if you are having pain with sex, see your doctor. There's nothing wrong with using lube. And there's nothing wrong with using hormones as you age to make sure that you're not having pain. And again, and no part of sex should be painful. If intercourse is painful, don't do intercourse. There's so much else to do.
Mm-hmm.
The other stuff is funner. Go ask anyone who's doing it. And so my advice to you is make love to yourself and give pleasure. Don't just take pleasure from others. And if you want to empower yourself as a person of any gender in a relationship, you empower your partner. And so empowering the other person's sexuality, and no blame, shame. Like, this is no one's fault. If it's anyone's fault, it's the fault of whoever's not publishing my books yet. Because we just need to get this information out there, and we need to stop saying, we can't talk about this, Dr. Wood, it's too taboo. It's not taboo, it's biological function.
Yes.
You just need to do whatever it takes to stimulate that libido, and the libido stimulation is with rewards from orgasm. Give them to yourself, give them to your partner, make sure they're equal. It should never be that one person has an orgasm 3 times in a row and the other person zero. If it In a queer relationship, if one person gets off and the other person didn't that night, it's probably going to switch the next night. It's not going to be the same for 7 years and then wonder why she doesn't want it anymore.
Right.
So
Yes. I
just
mean, we see this even in younger women. I mean, I have people that tell me in their mid 30s, they just don't have sex, or they just have no desire to even. And also, as we close, Dr. Teresa, let's talk about the people that are asexual. When I've seen quite a bit of them, and being misunderstood actually, even in the medical community, when they're saying they're asexual. Does that mean that even causing their own orgasmic experiences is not a possibility at all?
it depends. It totally depends if they're asexual by choice, or if they're
Okay.
asexual by genetics, or if they're asexual, like if it's naturally biologically asexual, or if they've had a bad experience and they never want another one. Like, some of those things are quote unquote treatable if they want it. But again, have every right to live this life however they want to, as long as it's consensual for anyone else involved with them. But like, an asexual person may not have, like, the the full sexual function development. uh, there will be animals in nature that have a missing leg, or different things. We can be missing parts of our pathways, right? um,
Right.
to say that half the population is missing their pathway is very unlikely, or that like 90% of women are missing a pathway that all other genders have is unlikely.
Right.
But for
Yes.
some people to feel zero desire, and even with coaching, with understanding where their body parts are, and with advice, and also with therapy, still don't want it, that's okay, right? This isn't a need. And maybe they if they want to be partnered, they should find someone who also feels that way.
Feel that
if,
way.
if they desire the intimate partnership. If they're in a relationship and they feel asexual, my questions are always going to be, when was the last time you had good sex? right?
Mm.
And find out if they're having orgasm, find out if they know, find out if they, like so many female bodied people I speak to, are just completely uh, ashamed to touch their own body and think it's bad and wrong and dirty. I mean, if you have the word bad, wrong, or dirty coming up in your head, there's a good chance that you've been brainwashed about something biologically normal. So,
I like that.
as soon as you hear those words, you could be questioning that this is probably not bad and wrong. It's part of my body, and it's part of how this human was created. So why would it be bad? Right? You got to
Mm-hmm.
question things that teach you that you're bad because of how you're created. And that's the same thing for genders. I mean, people are so quick to say there's two genders. Well, look at the science. There's not. So we can't, when we say we know what God thinks and God thinks this, well, we better be right, because the people who believe in God believe we were created by God. And if God's creating a whole bunch of middle genders and we're saying there's only supposed to be two, we got to be careful. And
Right.
if the bodies are created equally for sexual pleasure and we're saying only intercourse is allowed and everything else is bad and wrong, we better be sure we're right, because that doesn't sound like how we're designed, right? We say a lot of things we think God thinks, but really we've got to look at what has been made and see how it actually functions, and if it actually functions in a way that is only going to work well in relationships if people are coming together with equal desire. And the only way to equal desire is equal pleasure, and the only way to equal pleasure is stimulation of the pleasure organs, which are the clitoris and the penis, not the vagina. Again, then we've obviously been teaching the wrong stuff and acting really
For
sure about it
centuries. For
for
centuries,
centuries.
we've
For
been
centuries.
doing that.
And
Yes.
we
Cross
can think of
culturally.
the reasons why, but and I know we're closing here, so it's hard to start a whole conversation about subjugation of others for our own advancement that we think is the way to do things. I mean, certain Caucasian populations have subjugated all kinds of people for their own advancement, and we uphold people who win in that way. And women
Yes.
have been subjugated. They have become the subjects of men because of some old traditions that, for whatever reason, at that time in history, may have served some purpose that we may not even know about anymore. And maybe religion was used to bolster those ideas by the people who are promulgating them. It doesn't make them true. Okay. And truth is more in, like, as we study the science of it and start to understand, we're like, oh, well, why do our truths not line up with what we're finding in the real biology? And it's
Yeah.
probably because they were built for psychosocial reasons at the time
At the time.
that aren't relevant now. And we are slowly learning that subjugating people actually harms both the person who's subjugated and the person who thought they were empowered by that. And we see it with race, we see it with gender, we see it with ability. It's like when you try to undermine another person, you and that person are losing.
I
And
know.
and then we've got apologies to make and repairs to make, and it's just going to go on forever. Instead, we could do like we do in relationship counseling, when we say the way to empower yourself is to empower the person you're spending your life with, so they empower you back. And mutual empowerment is more of a thing. And sexual empowerment, when you give someone pleasure, they're going to want to give you back pleasure. When you take your pleasure off on someone, they're going to start a Me Too movement and get you away from them.
You
And
know,
then
we're gonna go on that. We talked about it. We talked about even how even women of color, their pain perception is different. You know, we talked about this. You know what, Dr. Teresa, as we close, I really want to thank you for doing this. It's been a long awaited program to do. And to our viewers, I want to say to you guys, let's normalize these conversations for ourselves, for our own growth and development and progressing ourselves, and also for the relationships within. Sex was designed to be enjoyed, not endured. right? It was
100%.
designed, it was designed to be enjoyed, not endured. All right. So please go back there, take the tools Dr. Teresa just mentioned here, go to her pages I shared with you, go and learn, drop her an inbox. She does tons of workshops. Even now, things have gone virtual. Keep in touch with her. And again, Dr. Teresa, thank you so much for this. And I want us to come back because I want us to go take a deep dive on the other aspect you said last, because I really want us to get to that. That Me Too, we talked about it just before we start the program. So thank you so much. And to our viewers, thanks for being here with us. Come back here next week. We're going to bring another speaker here because I really love these discussions. These discussions need to be taught. And honestly, I love these speakers because they come from a perspective of knowledge and also of proof. I love science that way. There's proof, but we need to open our ears and listen. We can also look with our eyes and not Google too much. You know, a lot of times there's this Googling and then talk this and that. But I bring all these thought leaders to come and educate us, give us all this up to date stuff. You just heard it for yourself from Dr. Teresa. Again, Dr. T, thank you so much, sis. We'll keep in touch here because I want to bring you back. Take care.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.